of a pre-ferment, a starter? Awesome. Okay. Who here uses a pre-ferment? Awesome. Who here is confused about their pre-ferment? Cool. Okay. So the 4 main pre-ferments that pizza makers are generally concerned with are a Biga, a Poolish, a sourdough, or a natural starter, and then old dough. So there's a fancy French word for it, but for us it's old dough. So why even bother using a pre-ferment? And what is it? So it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a pre-fermented mass that we make in advance. So either the day before, or if we're using old dough, it could be multiple days in advance. But it's something that is already fermented that we're then going to put into our batch of dough. So in technical terms, it's called an indirect method. So there's the direct method, which is just more of a Neapolitan style where you make your dough and that's it. But the indirect method is going to be using a starter, something that you've made in advance, that you're then going to put in your dough, and then it'll double ferment that way. So for the Biga, the Poolish, the sourdough, I've made them. I am going to pass them around. I know this is it's not a little bit harder just because it's a small thing, and I know we've all got masks on and all that kind of good stuff, but we're going to try and make this work as best as we can. At the end, you can all come up and smell it, touch it, do whatever you want to it. We're not going to use this. So it is going to go in the trash, so don't worry about touching it or anything like that. And then I'm going to try and answer as many questions as we can, but please hold off just because once we get rolling, it's kind of hard to stop and start. Okay, so first off, Biga and Poolish. So we're going to wait and talk about flour a little bit later. But in essence, what is it? A Biga is going to be a 50% hydration. Does this camera work? Can you all see this? So the 2 main ones that I predominantly use in our restaurants is going to be a Biga and a Poolish. If you can kind of see, this one is a lot more liquid, right? A lot more fluid. These were both made at the same time yesterday. They've been left out all day, and you can see where the tape is where the start line is. And so you can kind of see that they've grown beyond that, and then you can even tell that this one is starting to collapse. So we'll get into that. But just to kind of describe the difference between the 2, the Poolish is going to be a 1-to-1 ratio of flour to water, so 100% hydration. And then the yeast percentage is something that can be modified depending on when you need to use it. So if you need to use it quickly, we usually use about 1% yeast. Now we're talking active dry yeast. I will get into kind of the differences between the yeasts in general, but the Poolish is going to be your highest hydration. This, for bakers, if we're looking at dough, sourdough, breads, baguettes, ciabatta, things like that, this can even go up to 150% hydration, so something that is extremely liquid. On the flip side is a Biga. So you can tell that this is pretty solid. It's a solid mass. This one is 50% hydration. Same yeast percentage, but lower hydration. There's different reasons for why I would use one to the other. We do use both though, so there is no perfect one to use. It all depends on kind of what you're looking for. So the whole reason as to why we use these things is for flavor and for structure. Now for sourdough, I'll get into this a little bit later, but sourdough is natural fermentation, so this is where my yeast comes from. These 2 both have commercial yeast added into it. So these are using active dry yeast. We also use instant yeast on occasion, but instant yeast just doesn't quite suit our preferences, but these are both used with active dry. So the difference between active and instant, does anyone use one over the other, or do we kind of flip-flop back and forth? Who uses active? Cool, and who uses instant? Awesome, do you know why? So a lot of people don't really know why this is, but from my experience, active dry yeast is for longer fermentations. We normally do 5 days. If you're familiar with John Arena and Metro Pizza, he's famous for his 5-day Sicilian, right? His 5-day fermentation Sicilian. He does use instant, but he uses it in a very specific way. But active dry yeast is normally used for long fermentations. The main difference between the 2 is, so when it's made, it goes through a drying process. The active dry yeast process is a little bit longer, and so what happens is that the yeast cells are actually coated in dead yeast, and so the active dry has a thicker coating of dead yeast cells, as opposed to the instant yeast, which has got a thinner layer and it's also more porous, which means that you can throw it right into your batch of dough and it'll hydrate faster, which means that it's going to activate instantly. So which is why you see a lot of bakers and now pizza makers using instant yeast. It's easy. You can throw it right into your batch of dough and it's going to start activating relatively quickly. Instant yeast also tends to be a little bit more gassy. It tends to develop a little bit more gas right out the gate. Whereas active yeast is one that, because it has a thicker coating of those dead yeast cells around it, it requires a little bit more activation, right? We have to activate it in warm water before we use it. But it helps delay the fermentation to kind of help with that 5-day, 6-day. If you're lucky and you're using the right components together, sometimes with the New York dough you can even get it to a 7-day, although that's kind of taking a lot of chances there. But that's kind of the difference. I'm not really using fresh yeast when it comes to starters, although if you're a fresh yeast house, most Neapolitans sometimes they stick to it, that's all they know, that's all they want to use, then go ahead and use it, but you are going to have to use more of it. Active dry yeast and instant versus versus fresh. You tend to have 3 times the amount of fresh to dry because of the hydration component, right? Active and instant have had that hydration pulled out of it during that drying process, whereas active is a fluid state. So it's going to be, you can actually get it in a liquid form or in a cake form. So you have to use more of it, right?
Laura, how about some tips for the home pizza maker?
So for the home cook, I would probably recommend 2 stones or pizza seals. That's always the one thing that people forget, is they always want to use 1 stone. And in reality, if you really want to make a great pie, you're going to need 2.
Okay, that's a great tip. Now,
fantastic. Laura, can you give us some reasons why people should attend Pizza Expo?
Pizza Expo has become such a great place to learn, and if you're in the business for 25 years or if you're just now getting started, it's a great place to not only learn new techniques but also how to expand on an already growing idea or concept. It's a great way to challenge yourself, see what other people are doing out there that might benefit you, or let's say challenge you to maybe expand on something that you already have, or maybe develop a new idea. It's a great place to learn, as well as exchange ideas with other operators from all over the world, honestly. So it's a great place to learn anything you could ever want.
That is great. Laura, thank you so much.